Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is going to be another Canadian Soldier Reacts video, and today we are looking at could the US military conquer the UK if it wanted to? Now, before we get into it this week, I'd like to ask you to please leave a like on the video if you like it, and subscribe to my channel because it really helps the channel, and comment down in the comments if you have anything that you'd like to say about this. I'd love to hear the conversations. I love to talk with you guys. And spoiler alert, absolutely the US military could conquer the UK if they wanted to. That's not because an individual US soldier is, or even battalion is any better than a UK battalion. In fact, I think the UK battalions are probably, on average, better than the American one-on-one. But I've said this before, I'll say it again. Quantity has a quality all on its own. But let's see what this guy thinks. And without any further ado, let's get into it.
We all know US and UK are close allies, and that US armed might is far greater than that of UK. But just for argument's sake,
That's
and to
true.
learn what sort of limitations waging warfare across the ocean implies, this video will explore US invading the United Kingdom.
So the thing is, and as always, I'm going to compare this to Canada. So if you think about this just for a second, I'm not sure. Let me just go back here just a little bit. So look at the size of the UK, and I'm not sure off the top of my head what the population of the UK is, but I'm pretty sure it's significant. The size of the United States here, there are a little over 300 million people, I believe, in the United States, and the U.S. military has over 3 million. In fact, I think it's close to 4 million. The Marines alone, just one of the four branches, the smallest of the four branches, has, I believe, like 350,000 soldiers in it. I grew up in New Brunswick, which is this little area here, and it's about, I would say, a quarter the size of all of England. Canada as a whole, this everything that you see here has, I believe, 39 million people to the United States, 300 and some million people, and I'm not sure what the UK has. But what I will tell you is that Canada, for as good as their units are, and I will take Canadian SSF units over any other country's units every day, one on one. For as good as they are, there's not a chance in hell that Canada could invade anybody. We literally have in all this landmass, we have the population of California, and I'm pretty sure we couldn't even invade them.
Implies, this video will explore US invading the United Kingdom. So, with just the airplanes and ships left to count on, is an invasion over the Atlantic viable?
Well, it's not just the airplanes and ships. I mean, you have to be able to project power, and you've got two different situations here now, right? You've got the Americans trying to project power into the UK, and you have really only two methods of transportation, right? You've got air and you've got sea, or you've got the combination of the two of those things in carrier groups. You have a sea-based carrier group that is able to transport air units over. Not that you even need it with the United States now, because they can sortie out of, I think, just about anywhere in the United States and still be able to hit targets in England now. But on the opposite side of that, the UK is going to have all of their home-based defenses. They've got all of the power that they would normally project, and that's assuming that they don't call on any other Commonwealth powers. Now, Canada would be a bit of a non-starter. If the United States was going to invade England, I think they'd take Canada first, because as I said, 39 million people. We literally have our entire population is 10 times what their military has. I lived in Washington for several years. Joint Base Lewis McChord has, I believe, 85,000 people on it, soldiers on it. That's more than is in the entire Canadian military. 67,000, I believe, in the Canadian military now. So Canada would be gone first, I would think. But they've got all of their in-place positions to be able to defend. And they could defend for a little while, but again, the United States is going to steamroll them.
And now, could US military successfully invade UK if it wanted to? Some rules will apply. US
Okay.
gets no overseas bases, and all other countries are impassable.
Okay, I mean, he's adding extra rules that wouldn't really be there. But even so, no nukes. Listen, I'm not expecting anybody to nuke anybody ever. The consequences of nuking anybody are catastrophic to the entire world. So I'm not expecting that at all. Same starting morale. Like, is this a game he's doing this in? Like, morale. I mean, morale is interesting. For a professional fighting force, morale is less problematic, at least on the average. Whereas the country being invaded, morale is extremely important. And a 1-year time limit, they wouldn't need that. Like I said, with 3 million, they could blanket they could literally land the entire way around the island and start pushing in while they're bombarding with their planes. Ships. I mean, they'd have to take out the Royal Navy first, and that's not going to be as easy as it sounds. But the American Navy, I think, is somewhere between 4 and 10 times larger than the British Royal Navy. Like, the size and technological advantage of the Americans cannot be overstated. The amount of money that the Americans have been putting into their forces for decades is far and away surpassing every other country. In fact, I think the last thing I heard was the Americans spend more on their military than the next 25 countries combined. 23, I think, of whom are actually allies, Britain being one of them. So, like, the amount of money that America spends on this is insane. You have to put some stupid rules in place for them to lose.
Distance from US to UK mainland is pretty big, especially when reaching
That's going to be
London.
your biggest problem.
Before trying to land any troops, the seas must first be clear of British ships, and Royal Air Force must be suppressed. US
Yeah, so
has a
here
massive
we go. He's going to get
advantage
into
when
it. So, this is not like they're not. Well, they are going to roll over. I want to say they're not going to roll over them. They are going to roll over them, but it's not like the UK is defenseless, right? But is there more to this? Because I mean, if you look at this right now, it looks like 19 ships to. There's got to be more than that.
it comes to naval assets. Basically, all of its assets are made for oceans and could operate near UK.
See, that's nuts. They got 6 destroyers to 66 destroyers. 13 frigates. The United States doesn't even have frigates. Like, they're not even in the same on the same planet as the United States. Like, there's no contest. Like, none here.
If needed. While the Americans would need to sail to and from Britain, taking weeks away from their actual presence, US Navy could pretty much do whatever it pleases near the UK.
Yes, they
It's
can.
interesting to point out that most of US ships do not carry anti-ship missiles. US Navy prefers to use their carriers for such missions. British Royal Navy is to go down a similar route.
Queen Elizabeth carrier has no real air wing yet. Oh my god. Harpoon was set to retire in
Their Harpoon
2018. It's going to last until 2020. So this is a little bit older, but still.
missiles are old and set to be retired
That's
soon.
insane. And so talking about this, right? When you go into Canada, Canada's even worse. I can't remember the numbers of frigates and submarines that we have, but it's in the single digits, I believe. I think maybe 22, 24 odd ships altogether, but seaworthy ships that they're able to actually crew and put out to sea, I think 2 at a time. Like, I'm not kidding. 2 of my best friends are active military, active Navy right now. And the state of Canada's Navy is, well, the state of Canada's armed forces altogether is atrocious. Like, Canada absolutely could not invade England, but the United States could invade anybody that they wanted to. The entire world would have to band together against the United States, and I'm still not certain that they'd win.
Not all ships have them. Only a minor part of the British fleet has modern air defense systems. Basically,
Wow.
the sea war would be fought above the sea and under it, but the British lacked anti-ship missiles.
Yeah, and this is what I was
for
saying
its
before.
aircraft. Furthermore,
Technological
British
advantage.
Tornado aircraft ceased
It's
to
nuts.
train for the anti-ship missions almost 2 decades ago. Basically, if UK had to try and do air raids against US fleet, it would be down to 2 weapons: laser-guided bombs and short-range tactical missiles. Brimstone in particular might be the weapon of choice. While its warhead
Wow.
is tiny, Brimstone 2 has a decent range. Still, against dozens of
40
potent
kilometers,
destroyers
18
designed to deal with many anti-ship missiles at once, it's unlikely UK could do much. British best bet would
And
be
that's against a single ship, you got to remember, right? 66 destroyers alone. Now, obviously, they couldn't deploy all of those against England. Some of those have to maintain the defense on the opposite coast and maintain defense, just all around the United States, to be honest. But the number that they could deploy would be just insane. It's overwhelming force.
their
Massive,
submarines.
overwhelming force.
They're fairly modern. Theoretically, the British could use their ballistic missile subs as attack subs as well, and speed up the entry into service of another
Sure, but
astute
you're
sub,
forgetting the American
while keeping
subs.
one Trafalgar.
There you go. Look at this. 68 to a hypothetical 11? Another astute sub to be commissioned shortly. Oh, okay, so it's actually 10 with a new one coming. So really it's 10 to 68. Like, this is nuts. They've got more Virginia class attack subs than the entire British fleet. And Canada, I think, has 4 subs. And they were bought from the British 15 plus years ago. And I believe only one of them is currently seaworthy.
Running a bit longer, rummaging for retired sailors to crew it. Still, the British would be far outnumbered. US submarine fleet dwarfs theirs. Given a bit less time on station and British home advantage when it comes to resupply, the balance of power may not be quite 6 to 1. Still, it's no question the British subs would get hunted down within months. Aerial anti-submarine
definitely.
platforms would also play a large role. And while the British could use all the
See that? Oh my ever loving. 41 helicopters, Merlins and Wildcats. I'm not sure what those are. Anti-sub helicopters. Okay. Against 460 Seahawks. Plus another 100 and almost 40, 136 other sub-hunting planes. That's nuts. I don't think Canada has any sub hunting air assets, or at least not that I know of.
Their assets, even just the deployable portion of US assets, would be enough to force the British subs into hiding. Furthermore, US carrier-based air power would make it hard for British anti-sub helicopters to operate. The main force projection would be done by US carriers, naturally. US
Yes.
could choose whether to use more carriers initially and then have less available later on, or to maintain a smaller number on constant patrol. To defeat the British Air Force,
know how many
the former
carriers.
is more likely. US nominally has 11
No carriers for the Brits isn't as much of a problem because the United States is projecting power to them. Carriers are really only to project power into foreign seas. As long as you can take off and land from airfields in your home country, carrier groups are well, carriers specifically are irrelevant. The rest of the ships surrounding them, yeah, it's still necessary and a good force projection. So yeah, the Americans need the carrier groups in this situation. The British don't.
carriers, but only 9 air wings. It does
An air wing usually has 4 squadrons of combat planes. So I'm assuming, no, that's electronic warfare. I don't know how many are in a squadron. 1 squadron of EW planes, 4 squadrons of various support planes and helicopters. Approximately 50. Oh, okay. So these 6 squadrons are approximately 50 planes. Okay. Or maybe that's, oh, there might be 10 per squadron, right? 4 or 5 here, and that gives you 10 per, so 50 combat and electronic warfare, and then 15 to 20 support.
have an additional support wing, which is a lot bigger. It may be the source of
And that's a
1 or
single
2
air wing.
more combat wings after some months of preparation. But crews aren't the only issue. Lifespan of a carrier necessarily involves lengthy maintenance periods. Important to note is that the deployable period doesn't mean the carrier can actually be on a mission the whole time.
Yeah, but oh, hold on.
Usually 1 or 2 deployments
This is the same thing multiple times. I'm guessing he's doing this for each of the carrier groups.
are made during those 18 months. Missions are usually 6 to 8 months long, and several months are needed
So yeah, but the thing about this is these are peacetime numbers. In wartime, they could do much of this maintenance actually in theater.
to prep the carrier and its wing for another mission. Shorter missions might give more deployments in the short term, but in the long term, they would require even more maintenance for every
yeah, that's
month spent
irrelevant.
out at sea.
To actually take over the country, I mean, initial takeover, 6 months, I think, maybe being generous. That's not properly securing everything, and you would never, I don't think, quell the population. But I mean, short of killing everybody. But it would be pretty fast to just steamroll over them. 6 carriers. Look at this. 6 carriers served for 6 months and then replaced on station by 3 carriers. And when they say carrier, that's a carrier group, right? Carrier never goes anywhere by itself. So that's saying that they have at least 9 carrier groups. And that is a lot of firepower.
Because of all that, it's unrealistic US would send out more than 6 carriers at once, after a few months of prep time. Similar issues would affect the aviation assault ships.
It's already overkill.
Perhaps 4 to 6 could be deployed at once, after some preparations. Grand total of combat planes US Navy and Marine Corps could muster in a few months long air campaign is thus smaller than the total number of US planes. US might fly in fresh planes to replace ones that got lost.
So you're looking at 316 fixed wing aircraft to 180. That's closer than I thought. But again, the British is actually England is actually pretty powerful in its own right. It's just that the United States is the 12,000-pound gorilla in the room, right?
Flying them over the ocean to a carrier would be doable. What could the British respond with? Royal Air Force is smaller than even the readily available US planes deployed on carriers.
Yeah.
Another huge issue
Just
for
the
the
ones
British
deployed in
would
carriers.
be their lack of air defenses. Everything they currently have are fairly low altitude systems, meaning the US would be free to bomb them from high up with guided weapons. UK would also suffer the US cruise missile barrage.
Yeah.
While the Brits have some such missiles of their own, it's unlikely they would be used against the faraway US bases.
So, I would expect you would see a similar kind of, look at this. Wow, 6,400 cruise missiles versus, what is that? Under 1,000. 950. I would expect that you would see something similar to what we saw in the first Gulf War, is you would have an initial alpha strike of cruise missiles and air assets, and then probably a 2-week to a month air campaign designed to knock out the air power first and quickly. And then once that was suppressed, to go after very quickly, go after any concentrations of troops, ground troops, because in order to take and hold ground, you must use the infantry. You have to go in on foot. And the United States would want to eliminate any concentrations of troops immediately to in order to forestall that resistance. And guerrilla resistance, which is the only real kind of resistance that you're ever going to give the United States, guerrilla resistance is still formidable and can do a lot of damage.
Even the subs that could carry them would be better utilized for defense of the homeland. While not all could be launched at once, US could sustain the effort. The British Air Force would be mostly paralyzed on the ground. US has also a much bigger recon platform,
Yeah,
fleet,
well, it would be gone
especially when
immediately.
it comes to satellites.
And that's the other thing. Knowing what is where before you start this and having prepared targets and hitting those targets in rapid succession, that's your biggest key to minimizing casualties. The Americans are going to win no matter what. It's just how long it takes and how many people they lose doing it. To have the least number of casualties, you need to know what you want to hit, where they are, and you need to hit them very, very quickly and very, very accurately.
British lack those, as in the real world, they timeshare some
Oh, and again,
US
Canada
spy
has
satellites.
literally none of this. You're
US
you're
aircraft
far
would be
beyond the
looking
realm
for
of what
targets
Canada can
as
do
well.
now.
Britain would have no real means of scouting the US bases. US AWACS-type planes would be plentiful, while British ones would mostly be trapped on the ground, with runways and highways
Or
being mostly
destroyed.
inoperative. Thus the Royal Air Force would slowly get destroyed on the ground. When they would
Yeah,
be
they would be
able to
second
get
targets.
some
Like the first targets would be anything that could fight back your attack planes of any kind, and your ground-to-air defenses. That would be your first targets. And then the second thing would be anything that could see you.
planes airborne, they still may not choose to engage the Americans, as it's likely US attack waves would be made of close to 100 planes with possibly as many fighters as Britain would muster per each local interception, or more. The best Britain could hope for would
Overwhelming
be a
force.
roughly equal kill ratio in the
That's
air.
the way the United
And when
States
the losses on the
will
ground
do
are included,
anything.
over months of a protracted bombing campaign, US would still be left with a sizable force. All this didn't even include the US Air Force. While the scenario requires it to use the bases inside the US, Britain could be reached. At first,
Yeah.
bombers would be deploying cruise missiles, but later
United
on,
States
they
can
would
reach
be
any
likely
country on
used
the
for
planet.
bombing missions. But could the Air Force tactical plane fleet help out as well? With very ample in-flight refueling, the answer is yes.
Yes.
US
easily.
operates the world's biggest air tanker fleet. The Hercules-based tankers, however, are too small and would use most of the fuel just to get near Britain. Still, the remainder of the fleet has a substantial fuel offload capacity.
Yeah, so
and
in order
tankers
to do
could
that,
refuel
they would have to base it off of a carrier. They'd have to fly their tanker out to a carrier, and I'm not even sure if they can do this. They'd have to fly their tanker out to a carrier. They'd have to do refueling from an actual seaborne tanker. Yeah, this would be logistically difficult, but it absolutely can be done.
Each other. Such ops may sound complex, but compared to what the British did in Falklands War, they're fairly basic. The British used a dozen tankers to refuel themselves repeatedly, keeping the bomber refueled throughout all of the route. While all of the tanker fleet would not be available due to maintenance, the rest could still offload significant fuel loads just outside Britain if needed. With several refuelings per plane, US Air Force could still expect to have around 400 combat planes in action practically every day. The British would really have no chance in the air. Within months, the US
British would have no
complete
chance in the air,
control
on
of
the
the air,
ground, or in the
and
sea.
thus the
like,
second
just
phase of
period.
the invasion might commence. By that time, British ships would be mostly dead, even if they hugged the shores and just aided in the air defenses. British submarines might hold out a bit longer, if not being used to actively hunt down US
Only
ships.
if they hid.
But even if British subs managed to kill 2 US vessels for each of their own, final result would be the end of the Royal Navy. So
Yes.
at around 6 months or so into the war, the landings would be mostly unopposed, except for the Royal Army defending the shores. 6 months would be enough for US to
Okay, so U.S. Navy amphibious assault fleet, 29,000 troops and 20,000 troops with, or 20,000 troops with equipment. I'm not sure who they're referring to here, whether they're referring to actual Navy personnel or whether they're referring to Marines. I know the Marines, like I said, have 300-odd thousand troops. The Marine infantry alone might be 29,000 troops. But that's just the Marines. There's no way that they would just use that. They would pull their infantry, their actual infantry, over, whether they land them on the carriers and deploy them from there, or whether they parachute them in. There are many thousands of para-capable troops in the United States who could land anywhere in the UK that they wanted. 89,000 active Army and Marines, 27,000 reserve, Army Reserve, and 30,000 Army Regular Marine Reserve. Oh, wow. Well, there you go. Canada, the entire Canadian forces right now is sitting at approximately 62,000. Canadian land forces, I think the Canadian Army as a whole is somewhere around 27,000. There are 3 infantry brigades in Canada, the Vendus, the Royal 22nd Regiment, the French Regiment, the RCR, my regiment, and the PPCLI. And they're generally 3 battalions each. So even if you assume 1,000 soldiers per battalion, that's 9,000 infantry. And that is a generous estimate. So Canada is like America is to Britain what Britain is to Canada. Like, it's just orders of magnitude difference.
assembled pretty much all of their active and reserve assets. In addition to landing ships, US could count on numerous cargo assets of its Sea Lift Command and Reserve Fleet in case a port is secured.
The United
US
States will
Airborne
have
could also
no
help,
logistical
with the numbers
issues.
shown probably growing with newly trained paratroopers. Getting additional heavier equipment for them, however, would not be likely, given the time limit. US
Equivalent to
transport
6
plane
brigades,
fleet
that's
is
pretty
pretty
good.
big, and should be able to drop all the airborne troops within days. US
Yes.
could be looking at close to 30,000 troops during the first day, and close to 20,000 more the day after. Subsequent days would see fewer and fewer troops being added, and more supplies being brought in. The British would enjoy more soldiers than shown before. The reserve mentioned covers only the soldiers receiving some training periodically, and soldiers for whom some heavy equipment is stored.
Yeah, okay. So this is where the rubber starts meeting the road. Um, so there you go. 1.47 million ground troops in the United States. That's just ground troops. Whereas, yeah, the UK being on home turf, and this unfortunately is assuming that there was no effect of the bombing campaign. The bombing campaign uh, would and should be targeted to take out as many of these as possible. Um, you would expect to see it, like, I mean, if the United States invaded Britain, it's already an atrocity. So you would expect to see atrocity after atrocity piled on top of that, and hundreds of thousands, if not millions, killed by the air campaign alone. Because otherwise, if they don't do that, it might actually fail. Like, they can overrun the UK initially, but unless they start quelling the population, guerrilla tactics will rise, and they will be bled. Similar to how Korea or Vietnam went. Going into another country, invading them, and trying to hold that ground by force is amazingly difficult. Yes, Britain would get overrun. Initially, overrun, period. But allow them time, and they will band together, and they will resist. UK population of 66 million. You'll find, half of those immediately becoming soldiers of one kind or another. Like, if somebody tried to invade us, I can tell you a couple thousand people who aren't soldiers right now who would become soldiers pretty quick.
In an event of a total war, Britain would be using those 6 months to mobilize as many soldiers as possible.
Yeah.
While they would be equipped with basically just rifles, and while their training would be less than adequate, they would still boost the overall numbers several times. Yet all those soldiers may not be enough, as UK has a problem of geography. Its landmass is just too large. Its coastline is very long. Even when taking just the western part of its coastline into account, the area to be defended is huge. And what about the
they're
islands?
not going to defend
Perfect
an
for
initial
US
invasion.
to
It's
take
just-
and
it'll never
entrench
happen.
themselves at, before launching further landings from them. Most of those areas are sufficiently far away from the mainland that British artillery would not be much of a factor. And what about Northern Ireland? There are just too many places
Artillery
for US
wouldn't be much of a factor, but ship fire would be. Those ships can fire, minimum of 18 miles, probably further. Like, it's basically artillery, but bigger, and further. The ships can do a lot of damage to coastline, and when you get that much coastline, the ships surround you. Like, anything in 20, 30 miles ish that can reduce it to dust.
to concentrate its assault on. The British would not be able to move their forces around easily and protect those islands or the Northern Ireland. So the islands would fall one by one. Then
Yes.
either Northern Ireland would
100%.
be taken or part of Great Britain would fall. Hard to traverse
But like I said
overland
several times,
Scotland
taking
would
it and
be an
holding it are
obvious
two
choice,
very different things.
though that would also slow down US breakthrough as well later on. Cornwall or Devon are also decent picks, as British defenders lack room to swoop down on the US beachhead from all directions, though
Yep.
such areas would likely be more heavily populated by British military to begin with. Once the US manages to secure ports and airfields and brings in US Army reinforcements, it would be basically game over for the British. US would build up its helicopter force on the areas it has taken, which is
Look at this, 203 to 3,000. And Canada, actually, interestingly enough, okay, yeah, they're saying 203, but these are transport and utility helicopters. I think Canada, actually, I don't know exactly how many Canada have, but I they gotta they gotta. I'm not sure how much they've got, but I think they've got like 100-ish. I'm not sure. I think we're closer to England than we in helicopters than we are in anything
Considerable.
else.
While the British have a fleet of their own to help quickly distribute its forces where needed, their
Look at
numbers
this.
are
They can
small.
move 45,000
Both sides
troops
would
at a
of
time
course be
versus
losing many
3,500.
helicopters, US to British low-level air defenses and British to US fighter cover, which would continuously be flying over the important areas. The British would have only a small part of shown inventory of heavy weapons present at any one point the US
Yeah, and again,
attacks.
this is assuming all of this
While US
makes
would
it through
also
the initial
not be
bombardment.
disembarking thousands of its
not gonna
Abrams
happen.
tanks or 10,000 of other heavy combat vehicles.
Oh, there we go. This is what I was talking about before. 70 kilometers, 40 miles. That's 227 millimeter. 840 of these MLRS. It's medium something rocket system. I can't remember what it's called. And approximately 200 HIM. I don't know what those are. But 840 of them, 40 miles in. So anything within 40 miles of a coastline, or let's say 35 miles of a coastline, is going to be dust. Like, and this is, I mean, the only way that this becomes a factor is by them staying literally 35 miles back from the actual coastline itself, so that the American ships 35 or even 40 miles back from the actual coastline itself, so that the American ships can't hit them, even though the Air Force will still be coming after them. And then they do I don't want to say counter battery fire, but counterinsurgency fire to try to basically destroy the troops as the American troops as they're trying to come inland.
The overwhelming fire support coming from various directions would more than make up for it. Fire support from the ships may come in form of MLR units firing from the ships rather than actual gun barrage. US ships still lack long-range gun rounds. Attack helicopters are another way of concentrating force in one area quickly. But again,
Yeah.
the British are far outmatched.
Look at this.
Even if
792 Apaches and 154 Cobras. So the Apaches are significantly more larger and more heavily armed than the Cobras. Cobras are very light attack helicopters. Good for what they do, but I don't know what the MH6s are. But you're still looking at 850 odd attack helicopters all by themselves to 67 Apaches. So more than 10 times. And then they got, I don't know what the Wildcats, the Gazelle Scouts. That's a helicopter. That's not really an attack helicopter. Some lightly armed. These are more, a Gazelle is like a Kiowa. Gazelle, I think, is French, if I remember correctly. But they're basically just observations. That's why it says Scout. So they're not going to really do anything.
just half of US numbers are present. The issue for the Americans would be time. As the scenario asks what can be achieved within 1 year, US would be under pressure to progress from their multiple beachheads. Northern Ireland is likely to fall within the 1 year time limit, but only minor parts of the Great Britain would be overrun by the Americans during the same time period.
Yeah, I don't think I believe. Well, I mean, it depends on what they try to do. If they're just trying to overrun, sure. If they're trying to take and hold, yeah, it's going to be far more difficult to hold that kind of ground. But they're really kind of going to have to, because if they don't, eventually it will be retaken. If they're not willing to kill everyone, it'll be retaken.
The British would put up a hell of a fight. Ground troop loss ratio would favor the British somewhat, but when Air Force and Navy losses are added in, where Britain would suffer more heavily, the US would come out fine.
Yeah, again, all of this is assuming that the United States doesn't just bomb them back into the Stone Age, which they could do.
large chunks of conquered territory, the US could call itself a victor.
So, yeah, there you have it. Yes, the U.S. would absolutely be able to initially overrun the U.K. They could, the U.S. could overrun Canada with 2 bases. Hell, you can fit more people into a U.S. football stadium than Canada has soldiers. So, I mean, the United States could take Canada without a thought. But it's holding, taking and holding are 2 different things. And that's where the rubber starts meeting the road. So, yeah, I'm going to let that go at this. Long story short, the United States has so many troops and they're so technologically advanced. They literally could steamroll any country that they wanted to. The war in Ukraine has shown us that Russia is not what we thought they were. They are far too corrupt. Their soldiers are not, in general, a professional army. North Korea, the same thing, unless they've hidden away soldiers that we don't know about, which I don't believe that they have, and the malnutrition issue. I don't think either of them are even a factor. I'm not certain China is really a factor either, as much as they're trying to be, trying very hard to be. They're not there yet, but they may get there at some point. Anyway, that's going to be it for me for today. Don't forget to like the video if you liked it, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Bye.